The galaxy was quiet. Too quiet. Stars twinkled like distant jewels, but in the darkness, attention hung heavier than the vacuum itself. Every system felt still, but the stillness was unnatural, fragile. For centuries, the Galactic Council had ruled without challenge. Its authority was absolute, unquestionable, and untouchable. Planets obeyed orders without hesitation. Fleets followed directives as if every human, every alien, every system existed only to serve their will. The Council believed itself untouchable because it had survived every rebellion, every small uprising, and every attempt to defy it. Pride had made them careless. Arrogance had blinded them. And that blindness was about to be their undoing. Deep within human space, far from the eyes of the Council, humans had been preparing in silence. Not for war with each other, not for petty skirmishes in minor sectors, but for the one thing no one in the galaxy expected, an assertion of power unlike anything seen before. For decades, human scientists had worked in secret, combining old military research with new discoveries. Massive railguns had been constructed in orbital platforms around key colonies. Each railgun was the size of a city block, its magnetic rails humming with energy capable of tearing enemy ships apart before they could react. They were not just weapons, they were statements, warnings written in steel and fire. And if that wasn't enough, humanity had uncovered something the galaxy had only dreamed about: teleportation technology. Not small-scale jumps, not short-range transits, but instantaneous movement across light years. Entire battalions, entire fleets, could appear where they were needed in a heartbeat, bypassing defenses, security, and the Council's carefully calculated control. No one outside the human colonies knew. No one suspected. And now, it was time. The Council, unaware of what was being built under their very nose, sent a fleet to assert authority. They claimed it was a routine inspection, a show of power to remind the colonies who held ultimate control. Hundreds of ships, their hulls gleaming in Council-standard silver, moved like a silver wave across human space. Commanders aboard the Council's flagship, resplendent in their pride and confidence, believed victory was assured before the battle even began. They expected compliance, submission, obedience. They expected to inspect, to lecture, to leave a reminder of their supremacy. They expected no resistance. They were wrong. The first signs came as a whisper in their sensors. A railgun activated on an orbital platform of the planet Ardent Prime. No warning, no signal. The massive magnetic accelerator discharged, and the first Council dreadnought was obliterated in a single shot. The bridge officers barely had time to react. There was no panic yet, only confusion. What just happened? An officer muttered, staring at the flickering holographic display. Hull readings vanished. Life support failed. The dreadnought exploded into fragments that glowed against the darkness of space like shards of burning crystal. The officers of the other ships glanced at each other, their confidence faltering. And then another railgun fired. And another. Like clockwork, humans targeted key command ships, their actions precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. Council fleets tried to form battle lines, to maneuver into defensive formations, but it was already too late. Each railgun strike destroyed communications, disabled engines, and shattered command hierarchies. Panic started to ripple through the Council fleets as officers realized they had underestimated the humans. Their arrogance, their long-held belief in untouchable supremacy, was crumbling faster than they could comprehend. But railguns alone were not the end. Humanity had another weapon, one that no one had prepared for. Teleporters activated. Entire human units blinked into existence behind enemy lines. Massive cruisers, their engines silent until the last possible second, appeared within striking distance of Council command centers. Fleet carriers, bristling with weapons, materialized just above the hulls of Council battleships. The Council fleets could not react. By the time they raised shields, the humans had already launched boarding teams, disrupted their operations, and established positions the Council hadn't even known existed. Each teleportation strike was surgical, efficient, and terrifying. Officers screamed orders, but communication lines failed under the coordinated human assault. Systems designed to monitor space were bypassed entirely. Humans moved as if they were everywhere at once, appearing and disappearing faster than sensors could track. Fear spread in the ranks. Confusion became panic. And in that panic, the Council's pride turned to terror. For the first time, humans were not just fighting, they were rewriting the rules of war. They did not attack blindly. They did not celebrate destruction. Every move carried intention, calculated with emotion and precision. Commanders of the human forces had studied not just the technology, but the psychology of their enemy. They knew the Council's arrogance, its need for control, its belief in its untouchability. Humans struck at that arrogance, and in every strike, the Council's confidence fractured further. Ships that were supposed to be invincible became floating coffins. Fleets meant to intimidate were reduced to debris. Council admirals realized too late that they were facing a species that had learned the cost of hesitation, of pride, of underestimation. Humanity had endured hardship, betrayal, and centuries of being overlooked, and that endurance had forged an unstoppable resolve. Within minutes, the battlefield transformed. The human fleet moved as a single organism, coordinating railgun strikes and teleportation assaults across hundreds of light-years. Council ships could not anticipate movement. Orders were irrelevant. Strategies failed. Entire divisions of the Council fleet were destroyed before they even realized what had happened. The humans had created chaos out of control and turned it into efficiency. It was terrifying in its clarity. And yet, it was not just technology that made humans unstoppable. It was their emotional intelligence, their ability to anticipate fear, hesitation, and pride. Human commanders knew when an officer would falter, when an alien ship would hesitate, when panic would break coordination. They struck precisely at those points, exploiting flaws the Council didn't know existed. Every railgun fired, every teleporter used, was guided by the collective memory of humanity. Memories of colonies destroyed, of lives abandoned, of warnings ignored. This memory was not a weakness, it was the blade behind every strike. As Council fleets began to retreat, human units teleported in front of them, cutting off escape. No route remained safe. Communications failed, navigation systems glitched, and Council officers were left scrambling as human forces moved faster than light, faster than thought. Panic became hysteria. Dreadnoughts exploded silently, command ships vanished in teleported ambushes, and entire fleets fell in moments. The galaxy, watching from a distance, trembled. Reports from neutral sectors described scenes of destruction that seemed impossible. Humans, once considered a minor species, had turned their technology and discipline into a force that could annihilate fleets before they could react. On Ardent Prime, the first human orbital platform became a symbol of defiance and efficiency. Railguns lined the planet in perfect geometry, each firing in sequence as if guided by an unseen hand. Teleporters blinked human forces across the warzone, always arriving where they were most needed. Council commanders realized with horror that no strategy could overcome a species that combined precision with moral clarity, technology with memory, and intellect with emotional awareness. Humans were unstoppable because they were prepared, disciplined, and unyielding. The first strike alone would have been remembered as a miracle, an act of improbable luck. The follow-up teleportation assault proved otherwise. Humanity did not rely on chance. They relied on skill, knowledge, preparation, and experience. The Council's fleets, once symbols of ultimate authority, now drifted powerless in space, their pride and arrogance shattered like glass. Officers whispered in disbelief, some crying, some screaming, some frozen in awe. The humans, calm and disciplined, did not gloat. They moved methodically, silently, with purpose. Each action carried emotional weight, a reminder that they had endured centuries of being underestimated. Every destroyed ship was not just a victory, it was a lesson, a warning, and proof of what could happen when humanity acted. By the time the smoke cleared, the war zone had changed forever. The Council fleet had been decimated, their authority questioned, and their power shaken across light years. Humans had done more than win, they had announced their arrival as a force no one could ignore. Their railguns and teleporters were not just weapons, they were a declaration. A declaration that humanity had endured, learned, and was now unstoppable. And in the silent space that remained, a terrifying truth echoed across the stars: this was not rebellion. This was not war as the Council understood it. This was a storm, a human storm, and no one could stop it. The Council fleets that had survived the initial onslaught now drifted in confusion. Officers stared at their consoles, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Entire dreadnoughts had vanished in moments, command centers disabled, and fleets immobilized by strikes they could not anticipate. Panic rippled through the ranks. For centuries, these officers had believed themselves untouchable, trained to expect the unexpected, prepared for every known contingency. And yet, here they were, paralyzed, watching as humans moved faster than thought, striking with precision that seemed almost supernatural. The galaxy had always underestimated humanity, dismissed them as minor, fragile, insignificant. That mistake now cost the Council everything. On the human side, there was no celebration. There were no shouts of victory, no cheers of triumph. Humans moved with focus, calm, and clarity. Every officer, every pilot, every crew member carried the weight of centuries of suffering, neglect, and loss. They remembered colonies abandoned, warnings ignored, pleas unanswered. And now, that memory guided them, sharpened them, made them unstoppable. Railguns fired again, targeting supply lines and fleet reinforcements before they could move. Teleporters blinked human strike teams directly into the heart of enemy command ships. Officers aboard those ships barely had time to react before systems failed, power dropped, and panic spread like a disease. Humanity did not celebrate death. Humanity calculated, acted, and advanced. Every movement carried intention. Every strike carried emotional weight. In one battlecruiser, a young human officer remembered the colony of Elysium 4, where her family had been trapped when pirates attacked while the Council looked away. She gripped the controls tightly, her heart heavy with grief, yet steady with purpose. The fear and confusion of the enemy fueled her discipline. Humans had learned to convert pain into focus, grief into precision, and memories of helplessness into strategies that could not fail. In the Council fleet, chaos reigned. Ships tried to flee, but teleporters blinked humans in front of them, cutting off escape. Communications that should have coordinated defense broke apart under the weight of sudden strikes. Officers shouted, but their voices went unheard over broken comms and exploding consoles. The humans had created an environment where hesitation meant death, where pride became a trap, and where every move was anticipated and countered. It was not recklessness. It was emotional intelligence, sharpened into a weapon more deadly than lasers or missiles. On neutral planets watching from afar, citizens trembled at the display. Humans, once dismissed as a minor species, had transformed into unstoppable force, combining technology, strategy, and the emotional clarity born of centuries of suffering. Railguns tore apart fleets. Teleporters placed humans where none could reach them. The Council's authority, built over thousands of years, crumbled in minutes. And yet, humans did not gloat. They moved steadily, deliberately, methodically. Each ship, each officer, understood the cost of unnecessary action, the weight of every life touched by the conflict. That restraint made them unpredictable, terrifying to the enemy. Alien commanders tried to regroup, but it was impossible. Every countermeasure was anticipated. Every escape route blocked. Every tactic neutralized. Humans had studied not just the Council's fleets, but their minds, their pride, and their expectations. Humans understood fear, hesitation, and arrogance, and they exploited it perfectly. The shock of human technology and strategy spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Reports from distant systems told of entire Council sectors losing control simultaneously. Planets once loyal to the Council began to resist their governors, inspired by humans' power and discipline. Civilization itself seemed to shift. Humanity had not only destroyed fleets, they had shattered the image of the Council as untouchable rulers. Humans advanced through the war zone like shadows, precise and unstoppable. They did not panic when faced with resistance, they anticipated, countered, and neutralized it. Every strike, every move, was guided by experience, memory, and emotion. No one else could match it. For the Council, fear had replaced confidence. Pride had been replaced by desperation. Every officer realized, deep in their bones, that they had never truly understood humanity. They had dismissed them, underestimated them, and now that mistake was fatal. Human forces teleported into positions no sensor could predict, struck with railguns that left no chance of retaliation, and moved as if guided by a single mind. The shock was complete, absolute. And still, humans did not rush. They did not gloat. They moved slowly, carefully, ensuring that every threat was neutralized while minimizing unnecessary suffering. The weight of centuries of loss, the memory of helpless colonies, guided every decision. By the end of this phase, the Council's remaining fleets were scattered, broken, and leaderless. Alien commanders whispered in fear to each other, realizing the full magnitude of what had been unleashed. Humans had rewritten the rules of war. They had taken grief, suffering, and neglect and turned it into unstoppable discipline. The galaxy now watched in awe. Humanity had arrived, not as a minor species, not as a pawn of the Council, but as a force capable of reshaping the stars. And even as the Council fleets drifted helpless, human officers remained calm. They had won battles, yes, but they had also set the stage for something greater. Every destroyed ship, every teleporter strike, every calculated railgun fire carried a message across the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated, humanity was precise, and humanity, guided by emotion and memory, was unstoppable. The humans had not just fought, they had shown the galaxy the cost of arrogance, the power of preparation, and the strength that comes from enduring centuries of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. And as silence fell over the war zone, the galaxy understood a truth it could not ignore. This was only the beginning. The human storm had arrived, and no one, not the Council, not any empire, not any fleet, could stop it. The remnants of the Council fleet were scattered, crippled, and desperate. Officers shouted orders that went unheard, their pride shattered, their confidence replaced by fear that clung to them like ice. Humanity was not slowing, not hesitating, not faltering. The railguns fired again, tearing apart command vessels and supply convoys with the unerring precision of a species that had learned patience, discipline, and the cost of hesitation. Teleporters blinked entire human strike teams directly onto the bridges of Council cruisers, seizing control, disabling weapons, and neutralizing threats before anyone aboard even understood what was happening. Panic spread like wildfire. Fleet admirals tried to form countermeasures, to organize a defense, to rally their troops, but it was useless. Humans were everywhere and nowhere at once. The Council's arrogance, once unshakable, had turned into paralyzing terror. In the human flagship, officers watched the battlefield unfold with grim calm. They remembered the colonies that had been abandoned, the worlds that had burned while the Council looked away, the innocents who had cried for help and received none. That memory was not weakness, it was strength. Each human strike carried the weight of centuries of injustice, each movement guided by the emotional clarity that only suffering could forge. On one crippled Council battleship, a young officer hid behind a console as a teleporter strike team materialized around him. He had been trained for combat, for battle, for strategy. None of it mattered. His pride dissolved into terror as the humans moved silently, methodically, and took control of the ship without hesitation, without unnecessary violence, but with absolute certainty. Across the battlefield, entire fleets found themselves surrounded. Escape routes were blocked. Support lines destroyed. Humans had anticipated every move, every hesitation, every decision the enemy might make. It was as if the human forces could read minds, as if the experiences of centuries had become a weapon more powerful than any railgun or teleporter. Alien commanders screamed in disbelief as their fleets collapsed from within. Officers betrayed each other in desperation, trying to salvage what little they could. Ships fled only to find human units waiting, teleporters placing them in impossible positions, cutting off every chance of regrouping. And yet, humans did not gloat. There was no shouting, no celebration. They moved like shadows across the stars, precise, disciplined, relentless. Every strike carried emotional weight. Every action was guided by memory and suffering. In the heart of the battlefield, one human officer paused briefly to think of her homeworld, where entire cities had been destroyed by neglect and miscalculation. She remembered friends lost, colonies abandoned, and families torn apart. That grief did not break her. It sharpened her focus, guided her actions, and made her unstoppable. Humanity had learned the ultimate lesson: emotion, when understood and channeled, could be a weapon more precise than any railgun, more deadly than any missile. It was not hatred that drove them, it was clarity, purpose, and an unwavering resolve to ensure no one else would suffer helplessly again. In the Council fleet, desperation turned into hysteria. Ships collided, weapons malfunctioned, and command structures failed completely. Officers looked to each other for guidance, but there was none. Humanity had dismantled the enemy not just physically, but psychologically. They had turned fear into an instrument of victory, exploiting every flaw, every hesitation, every lapse in judgment. On neutral worlds, the population watched in awe as transmissions of the battlefield reached them. The humans were not just winning, they were rewriting the rules of war. Entire council sectors lost control simultaneously, governors were isolated, and fleets scattered. And yet, despite the power and devastation they wielded, humans acted with restraint. Civilian systems were protected wherever possible. Captured fleets were neutralized, not destroyed unnecessarily. Their discipline confused the enemy further. How could a species so deadly, so precise, also show care, restraint, and purpose beyond mere survival? Humans moved like a storm, methodical, unstoppable, yet always aware of the cost. Every decision carried memory. Every strike carried emotional weight. By the end of this phase, the Council's fleets were broken, scattered, and humiliated. Alien officers whispered of the humans' power, of their precision, of the terrifying combination of emotion, memory, and discipline that guided every action. The galaxy, watching from afar, realized something terrifying. Humans were no longer a minor species. They had become a force that could not be underestimated. Humanity had turned grief into clarity, loss into strategy, and suffering into discipline. The battlefield was silent in some areas, chaotic in others, but everywhere humans moved, victory followed. The Council had faced many threats before, but none like this. Humans had not only destroyed fleets, they had dismantled arrogance, shattered pride, and reminded the galaxy that power without discipline, without emotional intelligence, was meaningless. And through it all, humans did not celebrate. They advanced with calm, with focus, and with the moral clarity of a species that knew the cost of hesitation, the price of helplessness, and the value of life itself. By the end of this long, chaotic, terrifying day, humanity had done more than win battles. They had shown the galaxy a new truth. They were precise. They were unstoppable. They were disciplined. And they remembered everything. Every life lost, every colony abandoned, every injustice suffered. They carried it all as guidance, as strength, and as the reason why no one would ever underestimate them again. The Council fleets, scattered and broken, no longer had the ability to resist. Panic, fear, and disbelief reigned. Humans moved steadily, silently, calculating every next step. And in that silence, the galaxy understood one undeniable truth: this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived, and their storm had no end in sight. The battlefield had shifted. The Council's fleets, once proud symbols of control and authority, now drifted like broken ships without purpose. Officers barked orders that went unanswered, strategies collapsed before they were even executed, and every attempt at coordination ended in failure. Human railguns continued their relentless precision, tearing through massive ships with a cold, calculated accuracy that seemed impossible. Teleporters moved squads and strike teams to the most critical points, appearing suddenly on bridges, in weapon bays, in engine rooms, as if the humans were everywhere at once. Each movement carried the weight of history, the memory of suffering endured, the lessons of centuries of neglect and underestimation. Humans remembered the countless worlds that had been left to burn, the colonies abandoned while the Council looked away, and the innocents who had cried for help and received none. That memory had become a weapon, sharper than any blade, more precise than any railgun. Every human soldier knew the stakes, and each acted with the calm focus of a species that had been prepared for this moment for generations. In the Council fleet, confusion turned into panic. Ships collided, engines failed under precise fire, and command officers lost control of entire divisions. Fear spread faster than any message could travel. Fleet admirals, who had once believed themselves untouchable, now realized the truth. They had been outmatched, outplanned, and outclassed in every way. No technology, no fleet size, no experience could compensate for what humanity brought to the battle. Discipline guided by emotional intelligence, precision guided by memory, and strategy guided by grief. Human forces did not attack recklessly. They moved methodically, advancing through the battlefield like shadows, striking only where necessary, avoiding unnecessary destruction, and yet leaving no opportunity for the Council to recover. Teleporter units appeared behind fleeing fleets, cutting off escape, neutralizing counterattacks before they could even begin. Railguns fired in perfect synchronization, striking critical targets at the exact moment required to maximize impact and minimize wasted energy. Humanity was not just fighting, they were rewriting the rules of engagement. On board one human cruiser, an officer looked at the holographic display of the battlefield. Systems blinked in red and orange, indicating enemy ships destroyed, enemy formations broken. Yet his face was calm, almost solemn. He thought of his homeworld, of the families lost in conflicts the council had ignored. That memory did not make him hesitate. It sharpened his mind, guided his hands, and fueled his resolve. Every action taken was measured, deliberate, and emotionally driven, not by anger, not by pride, but by understanding. This understanding made humanity terrifying. Alien officers aboard their failing ships tried to rally their fleets, but their morale had broken. They could not comprehend the humans' precision, their discipline, or the emotional weight that guided every strike. Panic replaced coordination, fear replaced pride, and chaos replaced strategy. Systems once trusted failed under human assault. Communications collapsed. Shields were neutralized. Fleets drifted helplessly as teleporters placed humans directly where they were most needed. The galaxy watched in disbelief as humans dismantled centuries of authority and military tradition with an elegance and ruthlessness that no one had expected. Human ships did not celebrate victories. They advanced silently, steadily, as if guided by a moral compass forged in fire and grief. Every strike carried the weight of memory, the knowledge of what the council had ignored, the cost of hesitation, the suffering of worlds left unprotected. And yet, humanity moved with restraint. Civilian systems were spared wherever possible. Captured enemy units were neutralized efficiently, not destroyed unnecessarily. Discipline and morality were weapons as powerful as railguns and teleporters. In the council fleet, desperation gave way to despair. Officers watched their fleets crumble, helpless to stop the humans who moved with perfect coordination and absolute precision. Entire command centers were neutralized before orders could be transmitted. Support lines were cut. Escape routes blocked. Panic turned to hysteria. The humans had done more than destroy ships. They had shattered pride, broken morale, and demonstrated the terrifying combination of technology, discipline, and emotional intelligence. On distant worlds, civilians whispered tales of the unstoppable human fleet. Rumors spread that a single strike team could appear anywhere, that no plan could outmaneuver them, that humans carried with them the weight of history, memory, and the suffering of countless lives. And they were right. Humanity had become a force that could not be ignored, a species that combined grief, intelligence, and precision into a weapon more devastating than any missile or railgun. The battlefield was a testament to preparation, foresight, and emotional clarity. Humans advanced relentlessly, yet never recklessly. Every strike, every move, every teleportation jump was calculated, guided by experience and memory. Every officer, every soldier understood the cost of hesitation, the weight of inaction, and the value of discipline. By the end of the day, the council fleets were scattered, broken, and leaderless. Alien commanders whispered among themselves, realizing that they had underestimated humanity for centuries. Humans had not just fought a battle, they had redefined the meaning of warfare. The galaxy now understood that technology alone was not enough. Discipline, strategy, and the moral and emotional clarity that guided humanity had made them unstoppable. And as the human fleet moved silently through the remnants of the war zone, calm and resolute, the council could only watch and realize that the storm they had ignored, dismissed, and belittled had arrived, and there was no end in sight. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they remembered, they understood, and they would never allow helplessness to prevail again. The council had never faced anything like this. Their fleets, once symbols of absolute authority, were shattered, scattered, and leaderless. Officers shouted orders, but no one listened. Commands were meaningless because humans had already anticipated every move. Railguns tore through capital ships with unerring precision, reducing them to drifting wreckage before anyone could react. Teleporters moved entire human battalions into the heart of enemy formations, appearing suddenly on bridges, in engine rooms, and along corridors, neutralizing systems and capturing key personnel before the council even understood what had happened. Panic ran like fire through the ranks. Every admiral, every officer, every soldier realized in horror that they had been outmatched, outthought, and outclassed at every turn. The humans were not merely attacking, they were teaching the galaxy a lesson, and that lesson burned deeper than fire or plasma. Underestimate humanity at your own peril. On the flagship of the human fleet, officers worked with silent efficiency. They communicated with precision, yet no words were wasted. Every action had purpose. Every strike carried the weight of memory, of colonies destroyed, of families lost, of planets abandoned when the council had looked the other way. That weight did not slow them, it focused them. It sharpened every mind, every hand, every decision. Humans had transformed grief and loss into discipline and clarity. The Council fleet attempted a counterattack, hoping to recover some shred of pride, some fragment of authority. Their ships formed lines, fired volleys, and moved as if they could regain control. They failed. Railguns destroyed command ships before they could coordinate. Teleporters placed human units behind their lines, cutting off retreats and sabotaging weapon systems. Every plan, every maneuver, every desperate strategy was neutralized before it began. Alien officers screamed in frustration, fury, and fear. They were fighting a force they could not comprehend, a species that combined technology with emotional intelligence, strategy with moral clarity, and precision with relentless discipline. In one Council command vessel, an officer looked around at the chaos, disbelief etched across his face. Every system was failing, every subordinate was panicked, and every attempt to regain control ended in disaster. He understood, finally, what the rest of the galaxy had failed to see for centuries. Humans were unstoppable not because of their weapons, but because of who they were, what they remembered, and how they acted. Humanity moved through the battlefield like shadows, precise and unstoppable. They struck only where necessary, avoiding unnecessary casualties, and yet leaving no opportunity for the Council to recover. The galaxy watched from afar as entire fleets vanished under railgun fire, while teleporters blinked humans into positions no sensor could anticipate. Civilian worlds, previously under Council control, began to rise. Witnessing the humans' combination of discipline, precision, and moral restraint inspired rebellion. For the first time, the Council's power seemed fragile, vulnerable, mortal. The humans did not gloat. They did not shout. They did not celebrate. They moved silently, steadily, with absolute clarity. Every action carried emotion, memory, and purpose. Every strike was guided by the weight of the past and the determination to prevent future suffering. On one human cruiser, a young officer recalled the destruction of her homeworld, the loss of her family during the Council's neglect. She gritted her teeth, letting grief sharpen her focus. Every teleporter jump, every railgun strike, every command she gave carried the resolve born of that memory. Humanity had learned to convert grief into precision, loss into strategy, and suffering into unstoppable discipline. In the Council fleets, desperation became hysteria. Ships collided, engines failed, and fleets fragmented. Officers blamed each other, cried out in disbelief, and surrendered where they could. Humanity had dismantled them not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and morally. The shock of human strategy, technology, and discipline spread across the stars. Every observer, every neutral planet, every alien species began to understand the terrifying truth: humans were no longer minor. They were a force the galaxy could not ignore, a species that carried memory, intelligence, and moral clarity as weapons more potent than railguns or teleporters. By the end of this phase, the Council's authority was shattered. The galaxy had witnessed fleets destroyed, command structures obliterated, and centuries of pride reduced to panic and despair. Humans had shown that technology alone was not the key to power. It was combined with understanding, experience, and the emotional weight of history. The human fleet moved forward, calm and relentless. They advanced not with recklessness, but with purpose, ensuring that the enemy could never recover, that every action carried intention, and that no unnecessary destruction occurred. They had not only destroyed fleets, they had dismantled arrogance, shattered morale, and rewritten the rules of engagement across the stars. Humanity had become the storm the galaxy had ignored for too long. Every enemy officer understood, in the hollow of their fear, that this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived, precise, unstoppable, and guided by memory, and nothing would ever make them hesitate again. The battlefield was no longer a place of mere conflict. It had become a proving ground, a stage where humanity demonstrated the cost of underestimation and the power of discipline. The Council fleets, once symbols of unchallengeable authority, were reduced to fragments of smoke and drifting metal. Officers screamed orders, but the humans had anticipated every command. Every hesitation, every instinct. Railguns fired with unerring precision, dismantling entire squadrons before they could react. Teleporters blinked human forces into the heart of enemy ships, appearing on bridges, in engine rooms, and along corridors, neutralizing control systems and disabling weapons before any alarms could sound. Panic spread faster than any Council communication. For the first time in history, the Council officers realized they were facing a species that did not simply fight. They calculated, they remembered, and they acted with the full weight of emotional intelligence. Humans had endured centuries of neglect, betrayal, and abandonment. They carried the memory of colonies burned while the Council looked away, of families lost to wars they could have stopped, of warnings ignored across light years. That memory did not slow them, it focused them. It made every strike more precise, every maneuver more decisive, and every decision unstoppable. On the flagship of the human fleet, an officer stared at the holographic map of the battlefield. Ships moved as one organism, anticipating enemy reactions before they occurred. Teleporters blinked entire battalions into positions that seemed impossible, surrounding enemy fleets, cutting off retreat, neutralizing threats, and capturing key targets. The officer thought of his homeworld, destroyed while the Council did nothing, and his heart tightened. Yet he did not falter. That grief became his clarity, that loss became his purpose. Each human strike carried history, each action carried memory, and each decision carried moral weight. Humanity's power was not in its weapons alone, it was in the understanding of fear, hesitation, and pride, and the ability to use that understanding as a weapon. In the Council fleet, despair replaced confidence. Ships collided as crews panicked, systems failed under precise human attacks, and command structures collapsed. Officers shouted in disbelief, tried to coordinate, but humans had already anticipated every move. No countermeasure worked. No fleet formation could survive. Alien commanders began to realize a terrifying truth: humans did not just attack, they taught. They dismantled arrogance, shattered morale, and left no hope unchallenged. Across the galaxy, neutral observers watched in awe and fear. Humans, once dismissed as insignificant, minor, or weak, had become a force that could not be ignored. They moved with calm discipline, precise calculation, and emotional weight. Civilian systems under threat were spared whenever possible, demonstrating restraint even while executing unstoppable attacks. Humans had learned that strength without discipline was meaningless. They had learned that power without moral clarity was dangerous, but with memory and focus, it could be absolute. On one human cruiser, a young officer remembered her childhood homeworld, where entire cities were destroyed by neglect while the Council looked away. Her grief did not paralyze her. Instead, it sharpened her focus. She gave commands with quiet precision, teleporting strike teams into the enemy fleet's most critical points, disabling weapon systems, capturing officers, and ensuring that the humans maintained complete control of the battlefield. Fear spread through the Council fleets like wildfire. Officers realized, too late, that they had underestimated humanity in every way. Ships attempted to flee, only to find human forces already in position, blocking every escape route. Teleporters placed soldiers directly into engine rooms and command centers, neutralizing the very ability of the Council to fight back. Railguns tore through capital ships with surgical precision, leaving no room for repair or recovery. The Council's authority, built over centuries, was shattered in moments. Panic turned to chaos, chaos turned to hysteria, and hysteria turned to surrender wherever possible. Humanity's methodical, disciplined, and emotionally guided assault had left the Council fleet scattered, broken, and leaderless. The galaxy could not ignore it. Humanity had rewritten the rules of war, combining advanced technology with emotional intelligence, strategy, and the moral clarity born from centuries of suffering. Every human action carried weight, every strike carried memory, and every movement carried purpose. By the end of this phase, the Council had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. Humans were unstoppable. They were precise. They were disciplined. They remembered. And their storm had only begun. Even as the human fleet advanced through the remnants of the battlefield, calm, silent, and resolute, the galaxy felt the undeniable truth: humanity had arrived, and no one could stand in their way. The Council fleets were in ruins. Once proud symbols of power, they now floated like broken monuments, their commanders scrambling desperately to maintain order. Panic had replaced strategy, and chaos had replaced pride. Ships drifted powerless as railguns fired with terrifying precision, tearing apart entire squadrons before crews even realized they were under attack. Teleporters moved humans across the battlefield, appearing suddenly on bridges, in engine rooms, and even in cargo bays, neutralizing systems and officers alike. No countermeasure could stop them. Humanity did not act recklessly. Every strike, every movement, every teleporter jump was calculated, deliberate, and guided by memory, pain, and discipline. Every officer on the human fleet carried the weight of centuries, colonies destroyed, families lost, lives abandoned while the Council looked away. That weight did not slow them, it sharpened them. It gave focus to every decision, precision to every strike, and moral clarity to every movement. On the flagship, a young human commander stared at the holographic map of the battlefield. Thousands of enemy ships were scattered across light years, crippled or destroyed. Teleporter coordinates blinked in rapid succession, deploying human strike teams to critical points no sensor could track. The officer remembered the destruction of his homeworld, the screams of his people, and the helplessness he had felt when the Council ignored their pleas. He gritted his teeth, letting grief fuel his discipline. Every action he took now carried that memory, guiding his hands, sharpening his mind, and driving his resolve. Humans had learned to turn pain into power, loss into strategy, and grief into unstoppable discipline. Across the battlefield, Council officers screamed and shouted, but it was too late. Fleets collided in desperation, engines failed under precise human attacks, and command hierarchies shattered. Every countermeasure they attempted had already been anticipated. They were no longer fighting a fleet, they were fighting a species that combined technology, strategy, and emotional intelligence into a weapon more devastating than any railgun or teleporter. On one destroyed command ship, a Council admiral clutched the railing of his bridge, staring in disbelief as his fleet collapsed around him. Pride, once unshakable, had turned to terror. Fear gnawed at every officer, every soldier. They had never seen anything like this. Humans did not just fight, they dismantled arrogance, shattered morale, and exposed vulnerability. Across neutral worlds, transmissions of the battle spread quickly. Citizens watched in awe as humanity, long dismissed as minor, fragile, and weak, became unstoppable. Railguns tore apart fleets. Teleporters placed soldiers in positions impossible to anticipate. Command centers fell with surgical precision. And through it all, humans moved calmly, with focus, and with moral clarity. They did not celebrate the destruction. They did not shout. They advanced silently, steadily, ensuring that the enemy could never recover. Every action carried weight. Every decision carried history. Every strike carried memory. Humans remembered every world burned while the Council did nothing, every life lost, every cry for help ignored. That memory was no burden, it was their strength, their guide, and their weapon. Across the battlefield, entire fleets tried to flee, only to find humans waiting. Teleporters placed soldiers in escape routes. Railguns destroyed engines before ships could move. The Council's authority was crumbling in real time. Panic spread among officers who had once been confident, arrogant, untouchable. Now, fear was all they knew. Humanity had shown the galaxy that strategy alone was useless without discipline, precision, and emotional intelligence. By the end of this relentless assault, the Council fleet was broken beyond repair. Ships floated in silence, weapons offline, command structures destroyed. Humans had not only won, they had rewritten the meaning of warfare. Across the stars, the message spread: humanity was precise, unstoppable, disciplined, and guided by memory and moral clarity. On one human vessel, a young officer glanced at the stars and thought of her destroyed homeworld, the family she had lost, and the colonies that had burned while the Council did nothing. She did not feel hatred, she felt clarity. She gave orders with calm, her hands steady, her mind focused. Teleporters blinked strike teams across light years, railguns fired with surgical precision, and human forces moved like shadows across the battlefield. By the time silence fell, the Council had no hope, no pride, no authority. The galaxy understood the truth: humanity had arrived. They remembered. They endured. They acted. And their storm had no end in sight. The first wave had passed, but the humans were not finished. Every strike, every movement, every calculated action reminded the galaxy that this was not a temporary force. This was humanity unleashed, precise, unstoppable, and guided by the lessons of the past. And in that silence, a chilling realization spread through the Council ranks: the humans had only begun, and nothing could stop them. The remnants of the Council fleets were scattered across space, drifting like shattered memories. Their pride, once unshakable, had been replaced with terror. Officers barked orders that went unanswered, weapon systems malfunctioned under the relentless precision of human railguns, and teleporters moved strike teams into every critical position faster than any sensor could detect. The humans did not rush, did not panic, did not celebrate. Every action was calculated, deliberate, and guided by the weight of history, the centuries of neglect, loss, and suffering they had endured while the Council looked the other way. Each strike, each teleporter jump, each command carried memory. They remembered colonies destroyed, families lost, lives abandoned, and worlds left to burn. That memory was not weakness. It was their weapon. On the flagship, a young human commander stared at the battle map, red and orange markers showing the collapse of enemy fleets. He remembered his childhood home, the screams of loved ones trapped under attacks that the Council ignored, the helplessness he had felt as his pleas went unanswered. That grief, that memory, sharpened his focus, guided his hand, and gave him clarity. Humanity moved like a storm through the war zone, precise and unstoppable. Teleporters blinked entire units onto bridges, into engine rooms, and along corridors, neutralizing key systems and capturing officers before alarms could even sound. Railguns tore through capital ships with surgical precision, leaving no chance for recovery. Panic spread faster than any Council communication. Officers screamed in disbelief as every strategy they attempted was anticipated, neutralized, and destroyed before it could be executed. Humanity was teaching them the cost of underestimation, the weight of pride, and the price of ignoring the warnings. In one Council ship, an officer hid behind a console, his hands trembling as a teleporter strike team materialized around him. He had been trained, prepared, and confident. None of it mattered. Humanity moved with discipline and focus, guided by memory and moral clarity, and nothing he knew could match it. Across the battlefield, ships collided, engines failed, and command structures disintegrated. Every attempt to regroup or escape was met with precision strikes or teleportation units blocking retreat. The Council's authority, built over millennia, crumbled in hours. Civilian systems that had been under threat were spared wherever possible, showing that humans were not only disciplined but morally precise. They wielded power with restraint, striking only where necessary, yet leaving no opportunity for the enemy to recover. On distant planets, civilians watched transmissions of the battlefield with awe and fear. Humanity, once dismissed as weak and minor, had become unstoppable. Railguns tore apart fleets. Teleporters placed strike teams where no sensor could anticipate. Command centers fell with perfect timing, and fleets disintegrated before the enemy could respond. Yet humans did not gloat. They moved with calm and focus, each officer aware of the weight of their actions. Every decision carried the memory of centuries of neglect and suffering. Every strike carried the lessons of loss. Every maneuver carried moral clarity. In the midst of it all, a young officer thought of the colony of Elysium 4, where her family had been trapped during a pirate attack while the Council ignored the cries for help. That grief did not paralyze her. It focused her. It sharpened her decisions, guided her commands, and made her unstoppable. Across the war zone, alien commanders whispered in fear, realizing the truth: humans were not just fighting, they were teaching. Dismantling arrogance, and proving that experience and memory were weapons as deadly as any railgun or teleporter. The galaxy felt the shock. Entire Council fleets were destroyed, broken, and leaderless. Officers tried to flee, only to find humans waiting, teleporters blocking escape, railguns destroying engines before ships could move. Panic and despair replaced coordination and pride. Humanity had not only won battles, they had rewritten the meaning of war, showing the galaxy that discipline, precision, memory, and emotional clarity could make a species unstoppable. By the end of this phase, silence fell over the battlefield. The Council had no authority left. Their fleets were shattered. Their officers were helpless. And humanity moved calmly through the remnants, methodical, relentless, and unstoppable. The storm they had unleashed was far from over. The galaxy understood one undeniable truth: humanity remembered, humanity endured, and humanity would never hesitate again. The humans had arrived, precise, unstoppable, and guided by the lessons of the past, and every species, every fleet, every empire would feel the weight of that truth. The Council fleets were in complete disarray. Once proud, towering symbols of authority, they now floated helplessly, fractured, and leaderless. Officers shouted orders, but none were followed. Systems failed one by one under the relentless precision of human railguns. Teleporters blinked strike teams into enemy command centers, bridge rooms, and critical engine compartments before alarms could sound. The humans did not rush. They moved with calculated calm, each strike, each jump, each decision guided by memory, grief, and centuries of suffering endured while the council turned a blind eye. Every human officer carried the weight of their lost homeworlds, their destroyed colonies, and the families that the council had abandoned. That weight did not break them, it honed them, sharpened their focus, and made every action precise and unstoppable. Across the battlefield, council officers panicked. Fleets collided, engines failed, and command hierarchies disintegrated. Attempts at counterattack were anticipated and crushed before they could begin. Human forces moved like shadows, appearing where they were least expected, striking with surgical precision, and advancing with terrifying calm. They did not celebrate the destruction, they advanced with purpose. Every strike carried history. Every teleporter jump carried memory. Every railgun shot carried moral clarity. On one human cruiser, a young officer remembered the screams of her people as her homeworld burned under council neglect. That grief guided her hands, focused her mind, and gave her resolve. She gave orders that blinked strike teams across the battlefield, neutralizing threats, securing positions, and leaving no opportunity for the enemy to recover. Across the stars, panic spread. The council, once confident in its invincibility, realized they had underestimated humanity in every way. Pride became fear. Confidence became despair. Officers whispered of the humans' uncanny precision, their discipline, and the terrifying combination of technology and emotional intelligence guiding every move. Neutral worlds watched in awe and disbelief. The humans, once dismissed as minor and weak, had become unstoppable. Entire fleets were destroyed or captured. Command structures were obliterated. The galaxy realized that strategy alone was not enough. Discipline, precision, and emotional clarity were equally lethal. In the council fleet, desperation turned into chaos. Officers turned on each other in fear, ships collided, and systems failed under precise attacks. Teleporters blocked escape routes, railguns destroyed engines, and human strike teams captured or neutralized officers before resistance could form. Humanity had done more than win battles. They had dismantled arrogance, shattered morale, and proven that memory, discipline, and emotional clarity could create unstoppable power. On the flagship, a human officer glanced at the holographic display showing scattered council fleets. He remembered the loss of his family, the suffering of colonies abandoned by the council, and the cries of innocent civilians unheard for centuries. That grief did not paralyze him, it sharpened every decision, guided every strike, and reinforced the discipline that made humanity unstoppable. Across the battlefield, human forces continued to advance. Every fleet shattered, every officer captured or neutralized, every escape route blocked. The council's authority, built over millennia, lay in ruins. Alien commanders whispered to each other, terrified, realizing that they faced not just a fleet, but a species that combined strategy, emotion, memory, and discipline into a weapon far deadlier than any railgun or teleporter. The galaxy felt the weight of humanity's storm. Civilian systems were spared wherever possible, demonstrating restraint, discipline, and moral clarity even while executing unstoppable attacks. The humans were not reckless, they moved like a shadow across the stars, precise, calculated, and unstoppable. By the end of this phase, silence fell over the war zone. The council's remaining fleets were scattered and leaderless. Every officer understood a terrifying truth: humans remembered. Humans endured. Humans were precise, disciplined, unstoppable, and guided by memory and moral clarity. Their storm had no end. Every empire, every fleet, every officer across the galaxy understood that nothing would ever make humanity hesitate again. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The battlefield was quiet in some places, but the silence was not peace. It was the quiet that comes after devastation, after fear has settled deep into every mind. Council fleets, once proud and unshakable, drifted like shattered monuments across the stars. Ships without command, crews without purpose, officers without hope. Humanity moved steadily through the war zone, not rushing, not panicking, not celebrating. Every action, every strike, every teleporter jump was precise, deliberate, and guided by memory, grief, and discipline. They remembered every colony abandoned, every family lost, every life ignored while the council turned away. That memory was not a burden. It was their weapon, sharper than any railgun, more precise than any teleporter. Across the remnants of the battlefield, human officers gave commands with quiet authority. Teleporters blinked strike teams into critical positions before alarms could sound. Railguns fired with surgical accuracy, reducing enemy ships to drifting wrecks before crews even knew they were under attack. Every human unit acted like a single organism, moving with perfect coordination, predicting enemy reactions before they happened. In one human cruiser, a young officer stared at the holographic map of the battlefield, red markers showing the collapse of enemy fleets. She remembered her homeworld, destroyed while the Council did nothing, the helplessness of her people, and the cries for help that went unanswered. That grief did not weaken her. It focused her mind, sharpened her strategy, and guided every action she took. Across the war zone, Council officers panicked. Fleets collided, engines failed, command hierarchies dissolved. Attempts at counterattack failed instantly. Humans appeared where they were least expected, striking with precision, capturing officers, and neutralizing weapon systems with frightening efficiency. Panic spread faster than any message could travel. Across neutral worlds, civilians watched transmissions of the battle in awe and fear. Humanity, once considered minor, weak, and insignificant, had become unstoppable. Railguns tore apart entire fleets. Teleporters moved strike teams into positions that no sensor could detect. Command centers fell with perfect timing, and fleets disintegrated before the enemy could react. Yet humans did not gloat. They moved silently, calmly, and with absolute clarity. Every strike carried history. Every action carried moral weight. Every movement carried memory. In the midst of it all, a human officer remembered the colony of Vera 9, where his family had perished in an attack the Council ignored. That memory guided his decisions, sharpened his focus, and gave him purpose. Across the battlefield, human forces continued to advance. Every escape route was blocked. Every fleet shattered. Every officer captured or neutralized. The Council's authority, built over millennia, lay in ruins. Alien commanders whispered in disbelief. They faced a species that combined strategy, precision, discipline, and emotional intelligence into a weapon far deadlier than any railgun or teleporter. Humanity had dismantled fleets, shattered morale, and shown the galaxy a truth it had never understood. Power without discipline is nothing, technology without moral clarity is hollow, and a species that remembers, learns, and acts with purpose is unstoppable. The battlefield, though chaotic, showed the human method, precise, deliberate, emotionally guided. Civilian systems were spared wherever possible. Destroyed fleets were not celebrated. Every decision carried intention, every strike carried moral weight, and every movement carried the lessons of the past. By the end of this relentless phase, the Council had no fleet left to command, no authority left to enforce. Their officers were leaderless, fearful, and broken. The galaxy felt the storm of humanity and understood the terrible truth. Humans remembered, humans endured, humans were precise, unstoppable, and guided by the lessons of history and the weight of their suffering. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever make them hesitate again. The Council had lost not just fleets, but pride, confidence, and control across the stars. Humanity had proven that discipline, memory, emotional clarity, and moral focus could defeat even the mightiest power. And as human ships moved silently through the remnants of the war zone, calm, resolute, and unstoppable, the galaxy knew one undeniable fact. The storm had only just begun, and no one, no fleet, no empire could stand against it. The war zone was silent, but the silence was heavier than any roar. The Council fleets, once the pride of the galaxy, floated like wrecks in the void, leaderless, powerless, and broken. Ships drifted without command, crews panicked, officers screamed in disbelief, and the authority that had ruled for centuries had vanished. Humanity moved steadily through the remnants, calm, precise, unstoppable. Every railgun fired carried the weight of memory, every teleporter jump carried grief and resolve, every command carried purpose. Humans had endured centuries of neglect, abandonment, and betrayal. They had watched families die, colonies burn, and pleas go unanswered. They had suffered in silence while the Council clung to pride, arrogance, and a false sense of superiority. That suffering had been forged into strength, sharpened into discipline, and focused into action. Across the battlefield, human strike teams blinked into critical positions. Officers, engineers, and soldiers moved with perfect coordination. Ships that had survived railgun volleys were boarded, weapons neutralized, crews captured, all without hesitation or error. The council officers, once confident, now realized the terrifying truth. They faced not just a fleet, not just weapons, not just strategy. They faced a species that remembered, that learned, and that acted with the moral clarity of all the pain they had endured. The humans did not celebrate victory. They did not shout. They did not gloat. They moved silently, methodically, ensuring that no threat remained, no opportunity was left for the enemy to recover. Across distant planets, civilians whispered of the unstoppable human storm, their hope rekindled, their fear tempered with awe. Humanity had risen from oppression, neglect, and underestimation to become the galaxy's greatest force. On one human cruiser, a young officer stood at the observation deck, staring at the shattered remnants of council fleets scattered across the void. She thought of her homeworld, her family, and the lives that had been lost. That grief did not weigh her down, it sharpened her, guided her, and gave her purpose. Every strike she ordered, every movement she commanded, every teleporter jump she coordinated carried the memory of loss, the discipline of training, and the moral focus of a species that refused to hesitate. Across the stars, panic had become despair. Council officers whispered to each other, trembling, realizing their authority, their pride, and their fleets had been utterly destroyed. The humans had done more than win battles, they had rewritten the rules of warfare. Discipline, emotional clarity, memory, and moral focus had proven deadlier than any technology, deadlier than any fleet. The galaxy watched as humanity moved through the war zone like a storm with no end. They remembered every betrayal, every abandoned colony, every life ignored, and they acted with the precision of centuries of learning. Civilian worlds were spared wherever possible. Enemy survivors were neutralized with efficiency. Humanity's discipline and morality were as much a weapon as railguns or teleporters. In the heart of the battlefield, the last council admiral finally understood the truth. He had underestimated humanity for centuries. He had assumed arrogance and pride would blind them, that neglect and weakness would make humans easy prey. He was wrong. Humanity had arrived, precise, unstoppable, disciplined, guided by memory, emotional intelligence, and moral clarity. His fleet was gone, his authority destroyed, and his pride shattered. Across the galaxy, the truth spread. Humans did not forget. Humans endured. Humans acted with clarity, precision, and discipline. The storm of humanity had begun, and nothing, no fleet, no empire, no council, could ever stop it. Silence fell over the war zone as human ships drifted through the remnants, calm, resolute, and unstoppable. The council fleets were destroyed. Their authority was erased. Their pride and arrogance had crumbled into nothing. And humanity, the species once dismissed as minor, weak, and inconsequential, had proven that discipline, memory, moral clarity, and emotional focus could conquer all. The galaxy would remember this day forever. Humanity had arrived. Humanity endured. Humanity would never hesitate. And the storm had only just begun.